Welcome, I'm Professor Elix, and this is Chapter 12, Campaigns, Election, and Voting. Now in Chapter 12, Campaigns, Election, and Voting is the hallmark of the American Democratic Republic. In order for anything to get done, the average person with their ideology that we've talked about in chapter 10, which is they develop their socialization among the people they're with, eventually grow into partisanship to choose which political party they want to be a part. Now use their public opinion and express that opinion through their vote. We're going to go through chapter 12 to show you how the average person who is running for president, what they have to endure, and all the hoops that they must go in. And once we are finished this chapter, you should have an idea of the difficulty that it is to become president. A lot of people like to say, oh, well, it's fixed. It's easy to become president if everyone has your back. It's not fixed. Just think about this. In 2016, the number one contenders to run for president were Hillary Clinton and Jeb Bush. Hillary Clinton and Jeb Bush. If you would have asked me and most Americans during that time who were going to be in the general election in November 2006, most Americans would have put their money on those two. Instead, in 2016 in November, it was Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. And we know the winner was Donald Trump. So it's not fixed. It's actually something that the voters count on. So in the presidential election, which the people don't directly vote for president, popular votes count. And we'll show you in chapter 12. All right, so here we go. I'm gonna go to the PowerPoint. You know I hate PowerPoints. However, it is the tool that we have to use for this presentation. All right, chapter 12, campaigns, election, and voting. The learning objectives here are to compare and contrast presidential and congressional elections and explain the incumbency advantage, outline how campaigns are organized, and evaluate the methods for reaching voters. Evaluate the influence of money in elections and the main approaches to campaign finance reform. Analyze the factors that influence voter turnout and voter choice, and evaluate concerns with the electoral process and propose reforms to address them. The roots of American elections, the types of elections, presidential elections, congressional elections. Now, the types of elections that we have in this country depends deeply on what office you run. Most elections in the United States are made of three parts. We have the primary election, the general election, and runoff election. And now let me explain which one of those elections means. Primary elections usually consist of party members choosing the person they want to represent them in the specific office that is up for that's open at that time. So let's just say for president, and it's easy to use president, Joe Biden in the primaries were voted upon by all the Democratic members of each state. That is the primary election. And the Republican Party has the same thing with the Republican primary. Libertarians have it, and some other smaller parties do too. But in a lot of primaries in which, or in a lot of states in which there's no majority, the two that had gained most of the votes will have to determine who's going to have the majority. And that is called a runoff. When two people or two candidates come out of the primary who do not have the majority vote of the voters, must have a runoff campaign to see who would win the nomination for that party. After the primary is over, and depending on the state, say if there's still not a majority, so the one with the most votes wins in the primary, and that's how it's settled. Then from the primary, you usually go on to the general election, where you face the contender from the other party or other parties, where everyone goes head to head and everyone gets to vote who they want for office. And that's how general elections work. Now, there's something called closed primaries and open primaries. A closed primary is a primary in which only the party membership can vote for that specific, for those specific candidates. So to use the Joe Biden example again, in the state of Oklahoma, if Joe Biden was a Republican, that would be considered a closed primary. That means only Republicans could vote for Joe Biden. But Joe Biden is a Democrat. So in Oklahoma, it's considered an open primary. That means Democrats and independents can vote to determine who wins the nomination for the Democratic Party. So elections in this country seem a little weird because there's so many, so often, and for so many seats. But it really is quite simple. There's a primary caucus season. If there's not a majority, depending upon the state, they'll run it off for a person to receive the majority of votes in order to get the nomination for a specific party. And then once you get the nomination for the specific party to become that party's representative for president, Congress, what have you, then the general election will decide who will win that seat. And that's the type of elections that we talk about. Now, the elections that we talked about before is just to get someone in office. But there are what are called initiative and referendum elections. Initiatives or referenda are simply where citizens have decided to take the initiative and get something on the ballot for the general public to vote for, such as legalization of medicinal marijuana in the state of Oklahoma. The Oklahoma legislator, and it's usually when legislators do not have political courage to enact a bill and make it into law themselves, private citizens will take the initiative, get a petition together, get enough registered voters to approve for that petition, for that initiative to be placed on the ballot. And then that is voted for by the people. And in the case of Oklahoma, initiatives for medicinal marijuana or the expansion of Medicaid under the Affordable Care Act were done by initiatives because state legislators did not have the political will to do it. Both passed overwhelmingly, and now they both become a part of Oklahoma law. Referenda is basically the same thing, but only difference is that the legislator either through their state constitutions or through, and I'm going to say it this way, legislative cowardice, would rather defer to the vote of the people to determine what should be law. And depends on the referendum. Some of them pass, some of them don't. But when they do pass, they have and become law of that state. Now, recall elections only occur in a few states. Like right now in California, there's a recall election for Gavin Newsom, who is currently the governor of California. Recall election was brought up because Gavin Newsom locked down the state of California during the time of COVID. And there has been enough people to say his actions warranted him to be rejected from office. So like the initiatives, enough people get together, registered voters, to bring forth an initiative or a recall election to recall him out of his position as governor. And now for September of 2021 is the recall election against Gavin Newsom. And we will see if Gavin Newsom of California will survive it or if he'll lose it. Now, we're going to go into presidential elections. There are 3 steps of electing a president. Now, let me look at this. Joe Biden just won his presidency in November of 2020. All right, Joe Biden's grace period is between November of 2020 to the congressional elections of 2022. After 2022, you will start seeing the candidates who will challenge Joe Biden in 2024. So all these people, what they do right after that election in 2022, congressional election 2022, usually organize, get their organizations together and start raising money, getting their face seen across the country. And what they do is they start to coalesce the party faithful. What they want to do is get themselves known among their party. Many of them are known by that party. Some of them are not. This is all part of the first stage called the nomination process. Basically, during the nomination process, candidates go through the primary part of the election period in order to receive the nomination from their party. And they also go through what is something called caucuses. What caucuses are members of the party elite who get together and basically within that state vote or choose who they think should represent them for president. And after enough votes, they come to a consensus. They will pick the top 3 people who should become president or who they feel should represent their party to run for president. And out of those top 3, they will, again, these party faithful will vote to see who's the best choice. But in the primary, it is just like a regular election. If you're a Democrat or a Republican, if it's a closed and open primary, you just simply go to the polls as a Democrat, which most likely in Oklahoma would be considered an open primary. So that means independents and Democrats can vote for the possible Democratic nominee. And for Republicans, you can choose for the possible Republican nominee, which will be a closed election and it will be closed for them. After the primary caucus season has gone through, the person with the large number of delegates wins the primary. So when we talk about Republicans, the Republicans have a set number of delegates that you win by winning a certain number of states. You may hear something called winner take all. Basically, say like the state of Oklahoma may have 9 delegates for the Republican Party. Well, if say I won the Republican nomination or won the Republican vote, won the Republican primary in the state of Oklahoma versus Professor Timmerman, who's in the history department here at Langston, and I beat him, I, as the winner, take all the delegates and move forward to the next state, where Timmerman may challenge me again, and whoever wins that second state takes all those delegates, put it in their pocket, and move forward. In the Democratic side, it's the same way, but there's something a little different when it comes to Democrats. In the Democrats, not only do they have the delegates that you win as winner take all, and in some states, there's also what is called proportional winning. That means delegates are assigned to each district within the state, and what districts you win, those are the delegates you get. But again, over on the Democratic side, you win delegates, and the person that comes out ahead can win the nomination. But there's a difference. The Democratic Party has something called superdelegates. And these are additional delegates made of the party elite. What you have to do as a candidate is not only impress members of your own party, but since most primaries in states that have Democratic primaries or open primaries, these superdelegates also will determine where their vote will go to. So say like as if Dr. Timmerman has more delegates than I do as a Democrat towards the end of the primary caucus season. But I was able to convince the party elite that I'm the better candidate. If I win the majority of superdelegates and the delegate count was very close, I could wind up winning the whole game and leaving Dr. Timmerman out, even though Dr. Timmerman won the primaries. It's weird. And it feels like it's a way to circumvent the popular vote of the people. But so far in the last 50 years, most of the superdelegates have gone to the person who wins the popular vote. Once the primary caucus season is over, usually it runs between, say, in 2024, which is the next election season, the primary caucus season will start in November of 2023, run all the way until June of 2024. Then there will be a pause until about August. And in August, you will have the presidential or Republican and Democratic conventions. This is where all members who can make it can go to the national convention and represent their state. Now, if you're chosen as a delegate of your state political party, this is where you actually cast your vote. So let's just look at it this way. Since to use my example earlier, and I rather use Republicans because it's so much easier. I won the Republican primaries. I had the most delegates. But this is the trick. I may have the most delegates that were determined by the party faithful in each state. However, those delegates will show up at the convention to represent, hey, We belong to Professor Elix. But there's a trick. In the party convention, those delegates can change their mind. If they feel that you do not represent their best interests, they can change their mind. It's rare that it happens, but it's happened. But most likely, if I won the popular vote, and in the states where it says winner take all, I will take all the delegates. And then during the convention, you will hear the top speakers of the party, different groups that support the party, give speeches. And then each delegate will, in an open floor vote, will dedicate or will present their vote or their delegate or their representation for me as the nominee for president of the United States for our party. So say if the Oklahoma contingent of the Republican Party goes to the Republican National Convention and it's the floor count, the chairman of the Oklahoma Republican Party will stand up and say, Mr. Speaker or Mr. Chairman, I am from the great state of Oklahoma, where we grow wheat, where we had the tragedy of the Murrah bombing in 1995, and yet we recovered, where the state of Oklahoma and the pride of what we are as Sooners have overcome hardship of the Dust Bowl of the 1930s, through the tragedy of World War II, through the prosperity afterwards, and through the triumph of the 21st century. We dedicate all of our votes to the next president of the United States, Professor Jerry D. Elix. And that's who we vote for. And it's all this pomp and circumstance, and it just makes you feel all good to be there. And then, of course, the crazy parties afterwards. And this goes on all week. But the one who has won the primaries, the one that has gotten all the delegates, on Thursday night, usually the last night of the convention, the new nominee for the party speaks up and gives a speech. And when that speech occurs, America, even though America has been kind of watching, gets introduced to who the Republican Party is going to put forth. And not only America, but the world. The following week or the week prior to this, the Democrats have the same convention and the same thing happens. And both of them get this bump in popularity. And then there's a lull for about a week or two. And then both candidates will go on a campaign trail for the last fight for the next several weeks, all the way up to the first Tuesday in the month of November, where the general election will occur. Now, when the general election does occur, you will have everyone go out and vote. But your vote per se, which means on its face, will not necessarily count as an individual vote for the president. Your vote will count as a vote for delegates in the Electoral College. All right. In the state of Oklahoma, you will notice during the election, you see Democrats, Republicans, and Libertarians. And right below those names, you will see a number of names listed. This is Electoral College delegates. And those individuals right here are the ones you're voting for. So if, to use the example of me and Mr. Timmerman, if I was elected or received the most votes in the state of Oklahoma, the 9 delegates, well, not the 9 delegates, let's see, the state of Oklahoma has 5 congressional districts and 2 senators. And in the electoral college, in order to choose the president, the electoral college from each state represents the number of people who represents in Congress. So Oklahoma has 5 congressional districts and 2 senators. So that's 7 delegates or 7 electoral college votes. And if you were to vote for me in the general election, I would receive 7 electoral college votes, and that's called winner take all. After the election is over, in about 30 days after the election, those electors that are chosen in the electoral college will simply go to the state capitol and present their vote. It will be tallied up and counted, and it will say, and since I won Oklahoma, that 7 delegates for the state of Oklahoma of the electoral college will belong to Professor Jerry D. Elix. About a month later in January, early part of January, after the new Congress is sworn in, all the electoral votes from the different states are simply brought to Washington and transmitted or reported to Congress, where Congress simply counts them and certifies them. The decision has already been made, so there's no changes in that. What you saw in November, December, and January of last year and January of this year was a show. Once the election occurred, once the election results have been certified by the states, the fact that members in Congress challenged it was nothing but a show. Because according to the Constitution, the determination had already been made. And when people rushed and attacked the Capitol on the 6th of January, they weren't going to change anything. Even if they grabbed the box to burn it, it wouldn't have changed a thing. Your vote for your elector had already been submitted. The electors had already chosen in the state capitals. It was just Congress was just being notified of what the wishes of the people of the states have determined. And regardless of the ejection, over and over, because people were just simply playing for their crowds back home, it wasn't going to change. And if I seem very passionate, maybe even a tad angry, is that I do not like the actrix interfering with something that is quite sacred and quite constitutional and spreading ignorance of the Constitution even more, even though they knew how the final verdict had already been determined. So that's my soapbox. But as you see here, everything that I just explained is there. Congressional elections is basically the same. You have staff support or constituent services, visibility, access to the local media, generous travel allowances, and scare-off effect. Look, everything that I have just mentioned kind of running for president happens when it comes to congressional office, be it the House of Representatives or the Senate. Once you become a member of Congress, you have staff support, which provides constituent services. So say if you have anything that concerns the federal government that you need to get done by Congress, you always heard, well, talk to your congressman. Well, that's what you do. You talk to your congressman, you talk to your U.S. representative, you talk to your senator. But if a member of Congress is running for re-election, they have visibility. They have easy access to the local media because they already have the seat. And because someone may be very popular and a member of Congress, they may scare off challengers. That's the scare off the effect. But when you are a member of Congress and you have won an election before, you are the incumbent, and it's hard to beat you for those reasons. But sometimes incumbents lose. Like in the 5th District of Oklahoma, we had Kendra Horn. It's the first Democrat to be a Republican since, I believe, 1980. And she lasted for one term, which is 2 years in the House of Representatives. She wasn't redistricted out. She didn't have a scandal. And she didn't run on the president's coattails. But the midterm elections, since Oklahoma was so galvanized behind Trump, they came together and coalesced. As a majority, they were, and defeated her in office and put in Stephanie Bice. Now, running for office and reaching voters, you have the candidate, you have the candidate staff, the role of conventions and debates, and the role of media. Why do candidates run for president? Some have ambition. Some believe ideologically in certain objectives that they want the country to look like. Campaigns do take a personal toll. It's a grueling schedule. It's a 24/7. And you have to watch out for gaffes. And what that means is saying things out of turn that could offend so many people that they may not vote for you. The campaign staff. In order to run for any office, you must have organization. You must have a campaign manager that knows their shit. If you don't, you'll lose. You'll lose. You must have a campaign finance chair, a person who will manage the money. Understand this now. Campaigns are nothing without money. And if you don't have the money, you can't get the manager, you can't get the finance chair, and you can't get the communication staff. Yes, it shows all these wonderful things right here in order to have a successful campaign. But nothing matters unless you have money. You have campaign consultants, posters, people to read posters. Don't matter if you don't have money. Volunteers, yes, but volunteers can't go out and canvass with your information or get out the vote unless there's money involved. The role of conventions and debates. The national party, we talked about that before. Debates. Debates are good. It shows you how candidates can handle stress. I could say during the first debate between Hillary and Trump, Hillary lost. She seemed intimidated by Trump. The second debate, Hillary seemed to have found a better ground, but Trump kept hammering a message over and over, which seems Hillary couldn't get around. What about the emails? And the final debate between those two was more of the same. So by that time, everybody kind of tuned out. But in 2020, the debates were Trump was doing the same message, song and dance. And believe it or not, it had gotten old. But Biden had touched on that pandemic. Biden had touched on the economy. In the second debate, Trump's game was the same. And Biden kept on hitting him with the same facts. But also, Trump became very combative. I guess no one told him that Biden is a hothead and wouldn't take it. So he did not shrink back. And the final debate, which was up in the air, same thing. By that time, everybody had pretty much made their decisions. The role of media. The media could be your weapon, but they can also be your worst enemy. Use the media wisely. And I will tell people, if you're going to run for office, a lot of people like to play it safe and go and lean towards media that kind of favors them. I will tell you to not only go towards media that favors you, but go towards media that hates you. And the good thing, and the reason is, it shows you're not afraid. I mean, don't go to that well all the damn time, but go to it. Let them pepper your questions. Let them try to frame your response. But the fact is that you've attempted to reach out to those group of Americans, and you weren't afraid, and you knew the questions are going to come up, and you stand your ground. If you want to show that you're an adult in this game, don't run like you're afraid. Be brave. And I had to say, for Trump, he punked out in 2020 on this. He stayed with media that supported him. I had to give it to Joe. He went across the board and took the hits. A lot of people may disagree, but in that case, put Joe in an advantage. Also, advertising, ads, positive, negative, contrasting, inoculating ads. We know positive ads, we know what negative ads, we know contrasting ads showing the difference. Inoculation ads will throw something out there that will tell you something negative about the candidate in order for you to understand it, to not be shocked about it, and to let it just wear in and not bother you anymore. To think back to 2008, one of the biggest inoculation ads that happened was the fact that the future President Obama had not only smoked weed, but used cocaine. Well, everyone thought that was going to be a shock, but no one was shocked by that. Why? Because the president, several years before he even ran for office, had released his autobiography. And it was detailed in it what he had done. It was detailed into basically his entire life. There were not too many negatives that they could bring up to damage him. So he was inoculated. So when ads came up to attack the future president, everyone basically said, so what? We've read that. Give us something new. We were all inoculated from it. Basically, it's like the COVID-19 vaccine. We took it, we got immunity, we catch COVID, it's like a cold, we go on. Campaign finance reform, regulating campaign finances, sources of campaign funding, and public funds. Now, there was early attempts prohibition on soliciting funds for federal workers, the Tillman Act of 1907, which prevented the corporations from giving money to campaigns, the Federal Election Campaign Act, which set up the Federal Election Campaign Committee, which regulated campaign finances. Then the Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act put more restrictions on campaign financing. But the Citizens United versus the FEC case came into play. And under this case in 2010, it was determined that corporations in many states are considered people. And people individually had every right under the Constitution to donate to a campaign. So under the Citizens United campaign, Citizens United versus the FEC case, corporations were given the right to donate to campaigns. But also, something was said in this. It also said that campaign financing or campaign money that the corporations use was their form of free speech. In McCutcheon versus the FEC case, in which McCutcheon was by law limited to giving to certain campaigns, certain interest groups, it was determined by the Supreme Court that dollars, money, was considered free speech, and that McCutcheon had every right to give as much money he wanted to certain campaign organizations. So 2010 allowed corporations to donate. 2014 again declared that money is free speech and that donations to any campaign organization, such as PACs, super PACs, 501Cs, didn't have to necessarily be limited because money is considered free speech. I am waiting to see, and I'm surprised we haven't seen it yet, that someone challenges the overall rules of limits of giving directly to a campaign. Because since money is considered symbolized speech, that means any restrictions on speech should be a violation of the First Amendment right to free speech. And when that occurs, then there will be unlimited campaign financing from corporations, individuals, and organizations going to candidates. Sources of campaign funding. Individuals can only give up $2,700 per election. Political parties, joint fundraising committees, personal savings, no limit. So say you can receive $2,700 per election from an individual. Political parties can, the party that you are with can raise as much funds as possible for you. Personal savings, if you have several million, you can use it all. Political action committees, they can coordinate with your campaign and they can give you up to $5,000 election. Political action committees are officially recognized as fundraising organizations. 527 political committees and 501c groups. 501 and 527, these are for issue advocacy groups. And they can raise as much money as possible. 501 is, 501 especially. 527s and 501s create what is called dark money. What does dark money mean? Dark money is me as an individual citizen. Means I can donate to a candidate $2,700 election per election. So that's much. Even though everything has been raised since then to 5,000, I can also give to $5,000 for a PAC. Yay! Even though that has been raised too since then. So I can give those things. I have to list my name that I've given them, and I'm at my limit. 527s and 501s, I can donate to them. I don't have to give my name. And I can give them and give to them unlimited amount of money. I can give them millions and millions of dollars. And the 527s can give directly to a candidate. 501 can basically do anything that issue advocacy that is indirectly assists my favorite candidate. Super PACs, I can give as much money as I want to. This is not dark money, this is gray money. I can give as much money I want to super PACs, and they can help the candidate out. However, super PACs cannot coordinate with any candidate directly. They can't talk to each other, but they can help each other. So, say for instance, I'm running for office, I'm running for president, and there's a super PAC called JPAC out there. My campaign cannot talk to JPAC. But JPAC, even though they cannot talk to me, cannot coordinate with me at all, can watch what I do, listen to what I say, and follow my lead. And people can give as much money, declared money, as possible to them. So you may see things where Martin Lawrence gave to JPAC, who supported Professor Elix, $10 million in their endeavors. Fine. So what? Thank you, Martin, for helping JPAC, because JPAC helped me indirectly. But 527s or 501s, Martin Lawrence could have given an extra 100 million to him and didn't declare it. Given it to JPAC, giving it to my organization, do whatever. It's the dark money organizations that people would need to watch out for, because that's where most of the money are going. Public funds are available to presidential candidates. Candidates must raise at least $5,000 from individual donations in 20 states, must accept restrictions on fundraisings and spending, and few candidates accept matching funds. The presidential election campaign is $3 from each taxpayer who ticks a box on their tax return, and 20% of taxpayers actually participate in this. This is a form of campaign financing. However, and I have to say thanks to President Obama, because in 2008, he gave this campaign fundraising strategy of raising funds through the internet. He just simply asked people to donate $5, $10, $25, $50, nothing more really in that. If you wanted to donate more, you could, up to the maximum. And because of that, President Obama received almost $1 billion through that pipeline, to the point where he did not have to accept or try presidential election fund. He didn't need it. And ever since then, everyone has learned from this. And most candidates don't accept it. Patterns in voter turnout and choice. Party identification and ideology, income and education, ethnicity, gender and age, religious group and civic organizations and issues. Political identification, the most powerful predictor for vote choice. Basically, your partisanship can determine who you most likely will vote for. If you're a Democrat, you most likely will vote for Democrat. If you're a Republican, you most likely will vote for a Republican. You vote for an independent, you can vote either way or for a third party. Ideology. Liberals favor government involvement in social programs. Conservatives favor individualism and market-based competition. Ideology is not partisanship. Ideology is your belief system. Either you're considered a liberal, moderate, or conservative. You can be a liberal and be a Republican. You can be a conservative and can be a Democrat. You can be all three, liberal, moderate, and conservative, and be an independent. Doesn't mean that you follow any one party. Income, stable predictor of voter turnout and voice choice. Income, the lower the income, most likely the least amount of people will vote. The lower the income, the less likely you will vote. Think about it. The reason being, if you barely can eat, if you barely can keep the lights on to feed your children, to pay your bills, you don't necessarily have time to go vote. You don't necessarily have time to look at the issues. You don't necessarily care about what candidates are saying in your world because really, how does it doesn't affect you much, even though it does, but you don't feel like it does because you're being beaten up by life. The lower the income, the less likely you'll vote, the more alienated you are. The higher the income, most likely you'll vote. Why? Because through government regulation or deregulation, you have more to lose or gain. So higher your income, more likely you'll vote. Education, same thing with income. If you have less education, you don't know how important participating in government is. So you won't vote, most likely. You will become alienated. The more educated you are, you may even have low income, but if you're highly educated, you will vote because you know how government affects your life and how your vote can either improve it or without voting, you know how it can harm it. Voter turnout. Whites vote more regularly than minorities. True. Does help that they are considered the majority, but whites vote more. Why is that, Mr. Ely? Well, simple. Income and education. There are more high income earners who are white or higher educated people who are white. That's the main reason. That is the main reason. Many of you, especially who attend Langston and other HBCUs, many of you have been told by your parents and the people around you that voting is for suckers. It's all fixed. It ain't gonna help us do anything. You see the same shit we're going through. If voting was for suckers, why do so many people try to restrict it? No. It's just that the people who complain about that don't know how to vote or how to make change happen. But until that happens, whites will continue to be the majority to vote. Vote choice. Whites more likely to vote Republicans. African American and Hispanics more likely to vote Democratic. Well, simple income. Most income, high earners are ideologically conservative and they tend to vote Republican. Why? Because Republicans are less on government regulations, more the open market system, which will help their income in their socioeconomic position. And it would be best to have a candidate in office that support that position. African Americans and Hispanics more likely to vote Democrat, mainly because Democrats are more for government control over the markets and regulations and to pass laws to make sure that there is more equality when it comes to lending, more equality when it comes to opportunity for education and to achieve income. Plain and simple. But there's a change happening. As Hispanics, according to the 2020 census, Hispanics now make over 18 to 19% of the American population. African Americans are now over 15% of the populations, and other minorities have gained. As the same time, the white majority have actually decreased. So when we look at the numbers, Hispanics, African Americans, Native, Asians, and others have closed the gap on a majority now. So if you want to look at the nation as a whole in ethnic groups, European Americans have pretty much lost their majority. And the other ethnic groups are beginning to advance. And as they become more equal in income and in education over time, you will start seeing shifts. You will probably start seeing more whites or European Americans become more democratic. And you'll start seeing more African Americans and Hispanics slowly becoming more Republican. Or, like most groups, no affiliation at all. They may all become ideologically moderate and just simply vote for who they think is the best candidate. Gender. Women vote at a slightly higher rate than men, maybe because there's more women. Women more likely to vote Democrat than men. Why? Because the Democratic Party take up many of the issues that women worry about. Plain and simple. Age, predictor of voter turnout. Yes, the older you are, you tend to vote more because you have more to lose. The younger you are, you tend to vote less because you don't have much to lose. But in the last two elections, the 18 and 25-year-old group has voted in large numbers, in some of the largest numbers we've ever seen in history. If this holds on in the midterm elections of 2022, presidential elections of 2024, and the midterms of 2026, this will be considered a fundamental shift. And the age-old predictor of voter turnout will be thrown out the window. Religious and groups and civic organizations. These groups turn out the vote. Vote choice. Jewish voters are Democrats. Protestants are vote Republicans. Catholics are divided. Just depends usually on this on the ideological stance when it comes to abortion. Issues: economic performance, retrospective versus prospective justice. Let's see. Mending the electoral process, front-loading electoral college, improving voter participation. Front-loading, tendency of states to choose, basically front-loading is just for states to run the presidential primary early. Really doesn't help. They think it does give more appeal, so candidates will come to your state. But if you're not considered a swing state, no candidate's going to come to your state. Electoral college reform proposals. Either we need to amend it or get rid of it. And what I mean by that is we need to bring it back to where it was. State legislators choose the electors, or we go to a parliamentary system where we vote for Congress and members of Congress vote for president, or we just simply go to the Democratic Republican idea that we have, and let's go to the vote of the people, the majority vote. Improving voter participation. Registration online, same day voter registration, voting, voter identification laws. Voter ID laws tend to be a roadblock in voting because a lot of people don't have IDs. And without IDs, people tend to stay away from voting. Early mail-in voting. Early mail-in voting, which we've seen in COVID, has worked well, but new restrictions from states are going to limit that. Internet voting. Nobody can really secure the internet, so that's not going to help. Help American Vote Act. It failed. Improving voter participation. Strengthening political parties could improve voter turnout. Questions about how, multi-party systems, that could work. Put in more of a plural system of voting will definitely work. Let's allow former felons who've served their full time to vote. Every American citizen who is, no matter where you are, who you are, if you get an ID in a state you live in, should be allowed to vote. Don't need to be a registration. The moment you get the state ID, you're automatic registered to vote. Plain and simple. And you show up with your ID and vote. That's it. Enough. So, campaigns, voting, and electoral process. And I promise you at the beginning of this, you will learn the steps of what is a successful campaign. And let me tell you, these are the 4 things that make up a successful campaign. Money. Without money, the other 3 are nothing. Seriously. Money does not give you, well, unless you have money, you can't get the campaign staff or the campaign management, which is number 2. Without money, you cannot deliver your message to the people. And 3, without money, you can't get out the vote to support you. Money pays for the campaign staff. Money gets out your message. Money pays for the facilities for the volunteers and the equipment they need to get out the vote. If you cannot raise money, you will lose. You will lose. The only cure for campaigns, if you believe money is corrupting, is simply that make a requirement in law that you should give up or pay a tax of $5 every year with your income tax. and make presidential, congressional, state legislative, and local candidates take the money from that pool and run their campaigns from the allotment that the government gives them. If you feel that money is corrupting, that's the only way you're going to do it. But if you feel like I feel that money is an expression of speech, it's a symbolic form of speech, I'm not trying to convince you, but think about it. Once you give $1 to a campaign that you support, that is your political speech saying, I support you and what you believe in. If you believe in that, then you understand the possible evil of you have to give shitloads of money to a campaign, and as a candidate, you need to collect it. $20,000 plate dinner works. $50,000 plate dinner works. $100,000 plate dinner works. Some of the best campaign strategists are out there. Hire them. Hire them. Keep your message simple, no more than 3 lines. Why? Because most of the public will go to sleep. And get you a dedicated staff, people who believe in you. And they will work their ass to the bones for you. Thank you for listening to Chapter 12 today, Campaigns, Votings, and Elections. Chapter 13 will be soon. But until then, do your best in everything that you do. Always think critically, and God bless you. And I will see you.